Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Jules Rogers, who is here to share her recovery story. So I love talking recoveries because everyone's story is different, but we can all take something, I think, from every story, even if it is just that someone has recovered. I'm really excited to hear how your story went. So a very warm welcome to the podcast this morning.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So to start with, would you mind just saying a little bit about yourself and maybe what life was like before long COVID, before COVID?
Yeah, so I am a mum to two, and I was working in a part-time job that was quite emotionally stressful. And there was also some kind of stuff going on within the family as well, which was kind of adding to the stress as well. So there was kind of like quite a stressful job, like supporting people that were finding life quite difficult. And then there was difficulties at home as well. So it was like a perfect storm, really, of difficulties and challenges. So I would have said before I got COVID, I was pretty stressed. So my nervous system was pretty much in that fight or flight state most of the time.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because looking back on it, I would say the same thing about me. I was constantly switched on, always busy, always stressed, actually. Yeah, there was just so much always going on in life. And I think, if that is what life is like for you, you don't see it as being a problem. It's just completely normal, and we don't really have any sort of reason to believe that it isn't okay. Because I always find this really interesting speaking to people who have recovered, because I think often, if not always, there was always a kind of period of this kind of like stress or whatever you want to call it kind of preceding, and how much preceding and how much it was obviously varies because everyone's different. And yeah, I always think it's really interesting because I think my first reaction when someone said that to me was that they were blaming me for being sick. And I think it took me a bit of time to realize that that wasn't the case, because what is the point of blaming someone for being sick? It's not like you asked to get that virus. But I do think it is quite useful to kind of understand what was going on before, because it helps you to then work out what you want to do better, I think, in the future. And, kind of understanding cause and effect, I think, is a useful kind of thing. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but I do think it is really interesting how everybody seems to have some sort of, as you described, perfect storm in the sort of lead up to where that initial illness kind of happened. So, would you be able to talk a little bit through that initial illness? Starting off with, I think, when it happened, because I think for you, this is quite important.
Yeah, so I got ill at the very beginning of the first lockdown. And actually, I didn't really feel ill at all. I didn't have typical COVID symptoms. But for me, I just had this little odd kind of slightly nauseous and a headache. My partner at the same time, he had typical COVID symptoms, and where he worked, there was like typical COVID going throughout there. So I came to the conclusion it was COVID, because that had been going through our house, even though I didn't have the same symptoms. I've always been somebody that doesn't really get ill. So it's not uncommon for my partner to get quite poorly with something and me to get like some very much milder symptoms. And so it was probably about a couple weeks after I'd had those kind of symptoms that I then got this like real fatigue just hit me. And I kind of ended up taking a couple weeks off work. And then I think it became a couple more because I was just absolutely wiped out. But for me, when I was 18, I had glandular fever, which then became, they called it post-viral fatigue syndrome, later got diagnosed as ME. And so the moment I got that fatigue, it felt exactly like it had felt when I'd had that post-viral fatigue. So it kind of felt familiar, which in a sense was kind of quite scary because I was thinking, oh my God, I'm back there again. But also I knew that I could get better. I just didn't know how long it was going to take or when I would be better, but I knew at some point I would get better. So yeah, I ended up kind of taking, I think it was about 2, maybe 4 weeks off from work. And then I went back to work. And then by the end of May, I was kind of unable to do that level of work I had been doing because the tiredness wasn't getting any better. So then I reduced my hours a bit. And then I managed to get through to, I think, July time. And by then I couldn't do it anymore. Bear in mind, as well as kind of having to do a job, I'm trying to homeschool as well at the same time. So July came and I took some more time off. And then I made the decision, I think it was about mid-August, that I was just going to stop working because I knew that I couldn't continue working and recover because the work I was doing was taking up too much of my kind of mental capacity and my emotional capacity to then be able to focus on recovery and family and everything. So yeah, I made that difficult decision to give up work, and then it went on from there.
Yeah, you described that kind of experience of, oh, I recognize this. When you noticed that the fatigue felt very like your experience of post-viral fatigue syndrome previously. And, that must have been a scary thing. I'm just kind of thinking that if I felt that kind of like long COVID fatigue now, I would be like, yeah, properly freaking out. But I suppose as well as that sort of scariness, it's also a kind of, okay, I see you for what you are, kind of like I sort of know what this is. And maybe that gave you a bit of a jump start on what you needed.
I must admit, it was very, when I was being 18, being ill when you're 18 is so different to being ill when you're in your 40s and you've got dependents and life is very, very different. All I had to do at 18 was like crawl from one end of the house to the other because that's all I could do. I had no responsibilities. So, in a sense, yes, I recognized it and I knew that I couldn't just push through it. But when I got better when I was 18, it was like the moment A levels stopped, it was like, oh, and it also, I didn't actively do anything to get better. I rested because I couldn't do anything else because I was so tired. But there was no research or no active part from me about how am I going to get better. It just kind of happened, which it definitely didn't this time around. I spent a long time researching and looking at different ways to get better. Like I said, I knew that it would happen one day, but I had absolutely no clue how it would happen. So I walked many different paths and tried many different ways of getting better from long COVID that I never had to do when I was ill the first time.
So it was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not surprising in some ways, is it? Because, you're a very different person in your 40s. Life is very, very different than it is when you're 18. Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's talk about things that you tried to get better. I guess they come into two categories normally, don't they? Things that you did that helped and things that you did that didn't help.
In the beginning, I kind of focused mainly on nutrition and diet, thinking that that was the path to get me back to health. And also within that, I'd also read some stuff and seen some videos online about histamine intolerance. And like there was a histamine storm going on. So one of the diets I tried was the low histamine diet, which kind of made a bit of a difference. But for me personally, it wasn't a significant enough difference for the stress of actually trying to stick to such a strict diet. I did a while where I was making these green smoothies like every morning and having those and lots of raw foods. And that was another one that again, it was maybe slightly, but not enough to carry on with that very different eating style to the rest of the family. I think they were the two main diets I kind of tried. But then I stayed on the nutrition track and I started working with a nutritionist, and she had me do like an elimination diet. So basically took out anything that could have been like causing an intolerance and causing inflammation within me that was my body wasn't liking. And after doing that, I felt the wellest I had. So I kind of did that through kind of May 21 till about September time. And I used to find as well, I used to often crash in September. And looking back after it happened a few times, I used to find the summer holidays, having the kids at home, quite draining, because when they're at school, I used to get that break during the day where I could just focus on me. But during school holidays, there was none of that. So although my partner was incredibly helpful and would go and take them out, and I had friends, it was still that thing that I knew I couldn't fully switch off for any chunk of time. So September's would often be like a crash for a while, and I would be kind of take me probably till the next half term to kind of get my energies back up a little bit. So after I decided that nutrition was got me a little bit of the way, but it definitely wasn't the full answer for me. And then I had that dip again. I started working with a lady called Pamela Rose, who is she does a lot of pacing, and she's a fatigue coach. She does pacing. I did her 3-week fatigue recovery course, which again I picked up. There were some really good tips that I got from that, but it wasn't the full answer for me by any means. One of the best things I learned from that was she had a phrase called it was just for now. So to accept that this is just for now, and that if I do these things that look after myself, the bits I can't do that I want to do, like going on days out with the family. And for me, there was kind of a lot of, I struggled not being able to be there as I fully wanted to be for my children. So a lot of the time it was trying to hold myself back from doing stuff with them so that I could recover. I used to watch lots of videos on YouTube of other people that had recovered from, and I was watching lots of ones to do with ME/CFS because for me they felt exactly the same. So I was making that connection that even though they weren't saying long COVID, I knew that it was felt the same, so I was going to treat it in that same way. And I used to kind of almost have like create a spreadsheet going, right, that worked and this worked, and kind of really trying to put the puzzle together, because to me it was like a big puzzle and I just had to work the bits that were my parts of the puzzle that were going to be the bits that got me better. There was one that I saw, it was a lady who was a mind body therapist, and once I saw that one it was like, I really resonated with that one. And then I contacted her and I worked with her probably for about, I think we had about 8 sessions together, but I think it was over about 3 months. And that totally changed everything for me. It was that learning to associate the symptoms and those emotions that you get with the symptoms to the thought patterns that were going on in my head, and then learning that if I could take certain actions, that I could change the outcome. So I could change that symptom by taking certain actions, and that would alleviate certain symptoms for me. And building up this understanding of the mind body connection was so powerful, and was the biggest step by far for me in getting onto that kind of wellness recovery path.
Yeah, and I think certainly for me, it sounds like you had the sort of period of feeling as well, where you don't really know what's going on with your body and you don't know what to do to make it better. And then, you start hearing things and you start looking into things, and what those things are different for different people. But finding that first thing that helps in the moment, I think is such a powerful thing. I mean, for me, it was breathing. But when you feel those symptoms starting to come on, or if you feel a relapse coming, or you're starting to feel terrible, and whatever that looks like for you, finding that first tool where you can go, okay, actually, if I do this, it'll help. Maybe I can stop things from getting worse. Maybe I can start to get them a little bit better. Maybe I can actually stop the crash from happening at all. That wasn't always easy. But, kind of experimenting around with these interventions, or whatever you want to call them, I think, and just understanding that there are things that you can do, I think is just such a powerful moment, because up until that point, there hasn't been anything that worked. It had just been like your body is completely out of control, isn't it?
I was going to say, for me, that's the thing. It's like I just felt so out of control that I had no control over kind of my symptoms, my emotions. Everything felt out of control for me. And learning these things, that actually I could get back some control, and it wasn't all out of my control, was just so empowering, I think. And that really pushed that kind of like hope and that belief that I will get better, because I could see that things I was doing was making a positive difference, and that gave me that strong belief.
Yeah, and that belief is just so important in recovery, I
Yeah.
think. Um, yeah, it's interesting what you were saying about emotions, actually, because I mean, I think we're both from the UK, and it's not really acceptable to talk about emotions.
No.
It's very much, certainly my upbringing was the kind of keep calm, carry on. If you're showing emotions, you're kind of weak and hysterical, and that sort of thing. And I was never told that. But that is the kind of there's a lot of that in the UK, and there may be maybe elsewhere as well. And I think, with something like long COVID as well, you find that your emotions are kind of a bit out of control as well. You're swinging wildly from, I did this thing and actually it helped very, very slightly and everything's going to be okay, to, a couple of hours later where you're back in a crash and it just feels like life isn't worth living, and you're crying your eyes out, or you feel like you want to, but also you don't feel like you can. And we don't really know how to express emotions. We kind of often bottle them up, I think. And I'm starting to learn that that's really unhealthy. We should feel our emotions. I mean, there may be times to do that and times to not. If you're in the middle of a work meeting, maybe, letting out everything is, if you can hold on to that for an hour and do it later, then great. But I think, yeah, just really allowing ourselves to let them out is such a healthy thing to do, but it's completely not what we've always been taught.
Yeah, especially I think I lived and worked in America for a while, in my 20s, and I absolutely loved the fact that you can be more expressive and you can be good at something without being big-headed and all that. And I do find this country, as in the UK, is just much more difficult to express and be okay with saying how you feel and stuff. And you want, I think, growing up with that, it's almost innate in us to kind of berate ourselves slightly, which is so unhelpful when you've got this kind of illness, which I really believe is so linked to our nervous system. And when you're continually giving yourself those negative messages all the time, it just puts us in this state of stress and this state of dis-ease, which can cause disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, part of my recovery was kind of understanding things like the expectations I put on myself and the expectations that the world puts on me, or maybe that family members have put on me, and all those things that I believe about myself. And it's like, well, actually, why do I believe that? And some of it was good, some of it was bad, some of it was good in certain contexts. But certainly things like perfectionism, which is something that I have always kind of had. When you put that into the context of recovery, it's like, oh, that's totally unhelpful. It was like I was trying to perfect my recovery, and it was like, okay, this is ridiculous. This isn't going to help. So it was kind of understanding some of those things about myself that was really useful, but then not to berate myself for being a perfectionist, because that was my first instinct, was then like, oh, for goodness sake, why are you perfectionist? This is so unhelpful. And then it's like, oh my goodness, like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah, I must, for me personally, because I'm very similar. And I think so many people that have these kind of chronic fatigue illnesses have this kind of personality that is quite self-critical, and but also we're quite driven, I think, as well, to kind of achieve stuff. But I have learned to be much more self-compassionate, and that has been such a key part of me getting well, is that being kind to myself. Like, yeah, I remember at one point thinking I'm going to be the best person at recovering from long COVID, and how ridiculous is that? It's like, no. And then I caught myself with that, and it's catching those phrases and the way we talk to ourselves, and just, yeah, being compassionate, because that kind of competitive perfectionist tendency is really not helpful.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. For me, I mean, being a musician, you have to be a perfectionist. That is what makes you good at what you do. Well, certainly in some contexts, but then also you have to know when to let go of that. And I think that's what I wasn't able to do. I wasn't able to let go of some of these things in other contexts of my life. So it was like, right, I'm going to go up the hills. Right, well, I'm going to go up the hills perfectly. I'm going to do a perfect hill walk. Everything's going to be great. And it's like, hang on, that's not why you do that. You go up the hills because it's relaxing and you're putting yourself into this amazing place. So it's a lot of it for me was just kind of balancing that out. I don't think I'm going to stop being a perfectionist. I want things to be done well, and that's great in certain contexts. But yeah, not in others. And it's amazing what you see in yourself once you start noticing these things. And as you say, kind of catching yourself when you're maybe trying to be perfect about something where it's not really relevant. For me, anyway, I think, this has been a real kind of journey of discovery. Like I've learned a lot about myself that I didn't expect to. And some of it I liked, and some of it I didn't like so much. And that surprised me because I didn't really expect to learn things about me that I didn't like, which sounds very arrogant, actually, doesn't it, when you put it like that?
I think it is. It's like this journey of to recovery is, I think it's such a teacher. It teaches you so much about who you genuinely are in, and like if you take the time to look inside, the answers, I believe, are in there. And it's, yeah, it's such a great teacher to show you the way to find that health and everything, because you need to balance the body and the mind up. And once that balance happens, then the healing comes, kind of, it's part of the parcel. It's like once we're in the right space to heal, the right mental and the right physical space, then healing will happen. I just wish and I know it's not realistic, I don't think, but it's like sometimes it's like I hadn't had to go through this journey to learn these lessons, because I'm so incredibly grateful for the lessons I've learned through healing. It would be great to not have to go through this awful thing to learn those lessons, but I'm not sure I'd have stopped and listened if it hadn't got to the point where I had something that made me stop and I physically couldn't do anything, that I had to kind of process all those thoughts and all those emotions and work out what I needed to do to get to a healthy place.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I agree, I've come out far better than I went in, but that doesn't mean that I enjoyed the experience because it was absolutely horrific. So yeah, I don't think I would say I'm grateful for my illness, but I'm definitely grateful for some of the things I'd learned as a result of it. I think, yeah, I think that's a tricky one. And I certainly think that, for people who haven't recovered, that certainly can be something that's quite hard to hear sometimes. I think, people who are like, oh yeah, I'm really grateful for my
Yeah.
illness. And oh well, I'm still sick. I can't imagine how anyone could ever be grateful for this. I think your perspective does change quite a lot with recovery, but everyone's version of that is different. I loved what you said about the environment needing to be right, because we talk a lot about the sort of physical environment, in our bodies, getting things like nutrition right, for example, and reducing stress and breathing and all of these things that are hugely helpful. And it is incredibly important to make sure that what's inside is working as best as it can. But I think what we often talk less about is the mental side of that. So is our mental environment right as well? Because our mental and physical health is so intertwined. If our mental health is struggling, then the body is going to struggle. In the same way that if the body is struggling, the mental side is also going to struggle. And we know this. There's so much, things like depression and anxiety that come along with something like long COVID. So they both kind of have such an impact on each other, as well as things like environmental stuff around you as well. It's important to try and get that as right as you can as well, without being a perfectionist about it. Tying that back in, trying to get all of these kind of environments to be as best as they can, to then put your body into the best place it can be to heal. I mean, that's what the nervous system does, isn't it? The nervous system heals the body, but only if you're in the right place.
Yeah, and it's for me learning that how the nervous system works was really helpful to understand how I'd got to where I was, that I had been in that state of fight or flight. The sympathetic nervous system had just been dominant for far too long, and my body had got to the point saying, I can't sustain this. This is not sustainable. I'm going to shut you down. To then learning how to bring it out of that state of almost shut down and then come back to that kind of rest, relax, and be in that state most of the time. And just that knowledge was so beneficial to me, to know there was a process that I could kind of get my nervous system to go through, and where I needed to kind of reside most of the time. And I think when I did the work, the mind body therapy, a lot of it is it's about creating that kind of balance between, and learning how to kind of regulate yourself between the nervous states. And that was so fascinating to me, that then I decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I kind of trained as a life coach and mind body practitioner. And the journey of doing that studying was, again, that was still part of my recovery, because there's so much that you kind of have to, you coach yourself basically through the process. So you're coaching yourself while you're studying and you're training. And it was all that was kind of these kind of the last, I would say probably working with a practitioner got me 80% of the way there. And then I did some, on top of that, I kind of learned stuff about the kind of brain retraining, and how I talk to myself is massively important, and the self-compassion and stuff. And then the last bit was going through this course and studying and literally coaching myself to full wellness. It almost boosted my confidence too, because when I was really, I was like thinking, almost, I knew it wasn't dementia, but I was really worried that I wouldn't get my brain back because I couldn't remember anything. I'd be partway through sentences and I would lose words, and I couldn't remember what people were saying. And so doing a course, it took a lot of courage to actually decide to study something because I really had so little confidence that I'd actually remember anything I was going to learn. But it really boosted my confidence to know that my brain can work again. And it gave me back my brain in a sense because it gave me the ability to remember and learn and everything, which I was worried I'd lost.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember having a really similar experience when I did my breathing training. I wasn't fully recovered. I was doing a lot better, but I wasn't there yet. And it was a lot of time. It was a lot of energy. It was, a lot of sitting in front of a screen, having to focus for long periods of time. And I remember thinking afterwards, I was like, whoa, afterwards. But also that I did it.
Yeah.
I did it and I took it in and I passed. And, it was like, okay. So, okay, I was quite tired after that. It took quite a lot out of me. But at the same time, as you say, having that kind of a little bit of confidence in your body and in your mind and your brain and is quite a lot doing something like that. I think at the time I didn't realize quite how much it was that I was taking on. I think if I had, I probably wouldn't have done it, and it would have been a shame to have not done it. So yeah, that's quite interesting that you had a similar experience there. That's very cool. So you said that this kind of really helped you kind of over the finish line, I suppose. What did that final kind of like moment look like for you? Did you have a kind of like I'm there moment, or was it more of a kind of gradual process to kind of realize that you were fully recovered, that you had made it?
It was definitely not a, oh, yeah, I'm there kind of thing. It was that for me, it would be like that realization that the things I hadn't been able to do, I'd almost be like saying, oh, yeah, I can do that. Oh, yeah, I can do that. Like, I love walking. And it's like, for a long time, I had to really restrict what I could do, how far I could go, because I really suffered with post-exertional malaise that would really get me. So I'd be fine at the time because I'd be loving doing it, but it would knock me right back, which then, in a sense, almost was like I had to really flick the switch in my brain when I got to the point where I wanted to start doing more walking, because I would continually have a message that my brain kept saying, be careful, don't go too far because that'll get you worse. You don't want to do that. You'll make yourself worse. So one of the things I had to do with that brain, when I talked about that period of brain retraining, was when I went for a walk, I had to create a new neural pathway in my brain. It was not the be careful pathway. I had to create, and my mantra, I would walk and I would just keep telling myself, walking makes me strong, walking makes me healthy. And I would have that like on repeat going round in my head. And because I needed to break that cycle of kind of that I'd got so used to having post-exertional malaise that I just was so scared of going back there again. And then I realized that was totally a mental thing, that I could do that walking, but I just had to be able to mentally allow myself to walk, and then I wouldn't get any symptoms. So the worry of the walking would be so much more detrimental than the actual physical act of walking. So yeah, I feel I've gone off track slightly from what you asked me.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think we have certain things that we know that trigger us particularly. I know for me, arguments with my partner be incredibly triggering for me. Trying to do too much physically and stuff as well is a really obvious one. I think the emotional one was more difficult because I never saw it coming. And then we know, every time we do that, we get worse. And every time we try to do it again, we get worse. And then once we start finding things that help and we start to regulate our nervous systems and we start to improve, how do we get around that kind of like, I suppose it's a fear, isn't it, of doing that thing because we know what's going to happen when we do. Whereas actually it's thinking, well, Actually, no, my body is in a better place now. I have learned to breathe. My nervous system is more resilient. So actually, maybe I can do some of these things. But I think it can be quite difficult to get out of that. When every time you've done it before, it set you back, then why isn't it going to do the same now? And even though you can remind yourself that actually I am much healthier now, it can be difficult, I think.
Yeah. And I think to know when I recovered is like that when I would walk and that negative stuff just isn't there anymore. And it's so it definitely wasn't just a yay, I passed that line. It was very much like, oh, I've done that and there was no issue. Oh, I've done that and there was no issue. And I would think about climbing a mountain without having all the, but what happens if this, what if that? And I knew I could just go and walk that mountain and it would be okay. And knowing that if I felt a bit tired afterwards, that's okay because I've not climbed a mountain for a really long time. So it's perfectly normal to feel really tired when you do that. I don't know if gradual is the right word, but it was that kind of doing things that I would have done before in the same way. And then it was like each time it was like, yeah, okay, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine.
We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I suppose it's building up confidence in your body. It's building up like physical fitness, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
I think something that I remember was that, oh, okay, well, I think I'm good now. So therefore I'm going to go. I ran out the door and decided I was going to go run a 5K. And, 30 seconds round the corner, I thought I was dying. And it was like, oh, maybe I'm not better then. And then it was like, hang on a second. When was the last time I went for a run? Like, of course
Yeah.
I'm going to struggle here. So it was, yeah, kind of thinking about myself as an unfit, healthy person rather than a fit person, which is what I'd been before. And allowing that kind of fitness to come back in a safe, sensible way, rather than running myself at a wall over and over and over, which obviously was part of what put me there in the first place. That was a very interesting experience. And, looking back on it was like, well, of course that was going to happen. No one goes for a 5K having not run for years and is okay with that. Like, that doesn't work that way.
No. And I found for myself too, because I went into this like in my kind of early to mid 40s. And then perimenopause for me, I felt really hit. And then I've had to learn your body seems to change so dramatically. So I'm kind of all my goalposts have moved anyway because my body's going through a natural process. So I can't use the ones I went into it with as the ones I used when I came out. So that was learning how the body's changed just through the natural process of kind of perimenopause as well. So that was interesting. And I also, one of the pieces of research I saw was that there were some people of my age that the HRT had been beneficial for them. So I did do that. I did start taking HRT, and that was one of the biggest things for me that actually shifted my brain. It really helped dramatically with the brain fog. So I think there was that combination of like long COVID, perimenopause, all getting mixed up into that kind of cauldron of symptoms and everything. So yeah, I did find for me actually starting HRT, which is something I'd never ever planned to do, made a big difference. Another little bit of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because long COVID does affect more women than men. And the sort of average age of people with long COVID does tend to be around about the age that most people, not everybody, do start going into perimenopause. And, you kind of, as you just described it as the sort of like cauldron of evil kind of thing, of all of this stuff kind of happening at once. And it's not just menopause and it's probably not just long COVID either. And kind of trying to find the wood for the trees almost, by working out what and what's exacerbating the other, I suppose. I mean, I imagine that navigating perimenopause is not easy without long COVID. So, I can't imagine that having it with long COVID on top is all sunshine and roses either.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it was, yeah, a sort of experience where the kind of both happened together. It must have been really difficult.
Yeah, and I never really put the two and two again. It's that thing I just didn't think about it, and then I saw this evidence and these reports and I thought, oh, maybe there is something about it. So, and I thought I'll just try it, and it made a big difference. So I was really glad I did.
And I think why wouldn't you just try stuff either? I think certainly it can be quite scary trying something new, whether that's HRT, whether it's a drug, whether it's breathing, or whatever it is that you found on next on your list of things to try. And I think it can be difficult for lots of reasons. I mean, you put so much pressure on the next thing you try because you want it to really work, but you're maybe worried about side effects, or there must be so many things that are worrying when you try something new. And I think, one of the things for me is like, I'm not sure I want to try something new because I can't bear the disappointment when it doesn't work, kind of thing. And then it was having to, wallow in that for a couple of days and then, right, okay, now I'm ready to try it. Because there were definitely a few places for me where, maybe I had seen a bit of improvement, but then the house of cards had come crashing down and I'd hit another relapse. And it was like, why do I bother? Because it never works, or it never keeps working. And then, you take a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever that looks like for you to just be like, okay, I just need to allow myself to feel terrible and to be really down about this. And then I would sort of pick myself back up and be like, okay, well, that thing helped a bit. So let's find the next thing that helps a bit, and then the next thing and the next thing. But yeah, I think, in those moments, it can feel really horrible and scary and, yeah, difficult for whatever reason, to kind of move on and try the next thing, because that does seem to be what recovery looks like. I think everyone that I've spoken to, it hasn't been one thing. It's been kind of like bits and, a puzzle, as you described earlier, fitting that together. And that's different for different people, I think.
And I know when I'm working with people now that are working out their puzzle, working out their recovery, it's like, it's so individual. There are similarities, don't get me wrong, but the way people do it or the order people do it, it varies depending on where each person is at or which bit they're most receptive to. And I just think puzzle is such a good way because we put in different pieces at different times, but we all get there in the end. But it's working out the combination of pieces when you put each piece in and which are the right pieces for you. It's similar, but very individual at the same time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just to finish, maybe, what advice would you want yourself to have known kind of back at the start? So looking at it with the benefit of sort of hindsight, what might you have wanted to know?
That you definitely can get better, and that having a belief that you can get better is so important, I think, to keep you going through those really dark days. And to know that I'm going to learn things along this path that are going to be of great benefit to me once I get to the end, and I will be able to use the things I learn to create a life that I really want, and that you can create a life that feels kind of balanced and healthy and joyful from this really dark, difficult place. I do feel life is more balanced. I have a much clearer idea of how I need to live my life to stay well and to not let those things build up in the beginning that can be the kind of lead into these kind of chronic illnesses. So I think that's probably what I would tell myself.
Yeah, it's hard, I think, when you are in the middle of long COVID or any chronic illness, and people will tell you all sorts of things, and some of them will be useful and some of them might not be. But I think hearing it from people who have recovered, I think is always useful because you know what it feels like to be in the middle of it. And although, people's perspectives and things often change having recovered, you don't lose that entirely. You still know what that feels like and how awful that can be.
I think one other thing I just thought actually is also to trust yourself, because we know what is right for us within, and if to listen to those messages that come from within our mind and our body, and to trust the path that we know is the right one for us to heal, because nobody's path will be the same as anybody else's. And it's really having that belief and that trust that you know yourself better than anybody else. And I think, to have that is really beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you certainly will be by the end of this.
Yeah.
You're definitely going to know yourself a lot better. I think so much of this was really actually kind of listening to my body, which had obviously been trying to tell me all sorts of things for a long time. And I hadn't really been listening to it. And I understand what it's trying to tell me a lot better now.
Yeah, you tune into the messages, don't you?
Definitely, yes. I think a lot of it is working with the body rather than against it. Sometimes the body says no, and I think we need to be able to listen to that a lot better. Otherwise, it'll say no a lot more loudly and a lot more forcefully, and we will be forced to not do things. Certainly, that was kind of my experience.
No, definitely mine. It's like, the body knows how to heal when we get out of the way and let it do its healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming along today and for sharing your story and for sharing hope, because that's so important. I'll make sure that I drop links in the show notes to anything that we've mentioned today, as well as how to get in touch with Jules herself, if anyone would like to. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope something's been beneficial.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to